What I'm going to do here is talk briefly about a couple of topics, and then I'll start to answer your questions as people join and merge and come into the forum. Um, the first thing I want to talk about is there are a couple of topics to watch that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and please, if you are interested in other topics, please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll think through these. Like the counteroffensive, obviously, is a big one coming down the pike. Georgie thinks that it's coming within 10 days, 9 days now, and he's $2,000 of his own money that it will happen within that particular period of time. And if it doesn't happen within that time, his audience can decide where to, how to spend it on what charities, which, it's not bad. It's going to charity either way. I, I, um, I don't know. I can't tell, but it seems like everything that the Ukrainians are doing right now is softening up for the counteroffensive. The Moscow drones are brilliantly doing that by saying, yes, we can hit all the way to here. You better pull your defenses back to be able to do that. So if I were a betting man, I would say the very next thing, or, if I had a say in the strategy, and I'm not a military strategist by any means, but I'd be doing this in St. Petersburg tomorrow, and then I'd be doing it on the airbase some other direction so that they have to pull everything back. Now they may be pulling things up in order to do that, but then I'd figure out some way to get them hit on the far eastern side of their country so that they can, so they have to be on alert every direction before you have the incursion, whatever they're about to do to, and I don't know. I mean, the fast money is on that they're going to try to split not Crimea, split the occupied areas into two and try to sever that land bridge and that kind of thing. I don't know if that's the case or not, but before they do whatever they do, doing these things seems to be softening them up. It's almost like the equivalent of a bombardment before the attack, right? They're doing these kinds of things. Hello, how are you? Welcome. I see a number of you coming in. So I think that's one thing to watch. I think another thing to watch is to see what happens in Bucha. Not Bucha, in Bakhmut. So they've been withdrawing Wagner and putting in the others, and is that going to become another hotspot, or is that just going to be holding its position? Um, I I wonder if they won't, try to restart Bakhmut some to pull people there just before the actual strike. But that again, I'm not a military strategist, so this is just my speculation. I'd watch other things as well, and I'm curious what you would be focused on. Um, and I learn a lot from you guys. I've in reading your comments, it has really steered me into certain things that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten. So I very much appreciate you. Um, I'm concerned that we can, if we're not careful, become an echo chamber unto ourselves. And that's one of the reasons that I highlight the other YouTubers, and not for I'm not trying to show the similarities. I'm trying to show the differences so that we can actually see, like, we're not all of the same opinion. And I don't put on the rah rah, Ukraine's going to win. Doesn't matter what happens. Next week it's over, or that kind of thing. It's not, I, I mean, I've seen estimates that it could be over as early as this year, but I've seen estimates of decades, and I'm not a decades guy because I think that they can get this thing done. But I think at New Year's, I said I think we'll still be here next New Year's, and I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I hope that I'm wrong. I want to be wrong about that, but I'm not sure that I will be. But we want to make sure that we're not in an echo chamber, just hearing our own thoughts and thinking and agreeing with our own thoughts. So we want to expand and hear others. And so for two reasons. For that reason, I do two different things. One, I show the differences between, so last video yesterday, Vlad and Anders Puck Nielsen and Jake Bro and others and Georgie and right and Zach the Russian, and it's just seeing where they are in different places. It helps us kind of understand, and we're all trying to understand the same thing. So that's one. And then I also and I think it's very important. Some people disagree with me and they say, don't give these guys any airtime. But I think it's also important to hear. And so I did the Scott Ritter thing again yesterday because I saw that article about waging the peace. And I went to Russia and yeah. Okay. If you haven't read that article, I highlight the article and then I show him on his trip answering questions. And I think it's important to highlight, especially people like that are useful idiots. And I don't mean that they're not smart. Useful idiot is a term that meant like people that would go to the Soviet Union, talk about how this is the future and come back and talk about how great it was. And then when they come back, they're kind of uh, bringing the Soviet propaganda back. In fact, Vlad yesterday talked about how Russian propaganda has shifted back from the recent postmodern to trying to actually prove a different perspective of the old Soviet Union, and I've seen this shift over time a little bit, and I think he's right about that. He's right about a lot of things. Um, and so it's important to highlight folks like Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter and the Duran and others along those lines, so that you're hearing and to compare that to Russian talking points at the same time. And it's important for a couple reasons. One, so that you all that are regular viewers who are so invested in this, watching other channels, trying to understand, can see clearly the difference. But what the most gratifying thing to me here so far has been when people, and there have been a couple of people that have told me like, "Wow, I thought that Ritter or McGregor or whoever was on point. They're just spouting Russian talking points. What are we doing listening to that?" And so that's really great, because turning those people away from that kind of nonsense is really important. Um, so that leads me to what I want to talk about here with you, and that is, who should I react to? Like if you can put in the comments people that you think are like, yeah, I saw you do the Ritter and McGregor and Redacted and Judge Napolitano and whatever. You should do this one next. History, what's the name of the history thing? History like Masters or something. I don't remember. I saw one or two of their videos, and I'm like, okay, this guy, he he's trying to take down the mainstream media with this, and he just built his narrative wrong. He's using legitimate facts, but then building a narrative around it that isn't really following those facts. And so, history legends. Thank you, Johnny. And yeah, history legends is one of those. By the way, can you see the chat when you're watching on your side? Just say yes or no. Like you can see me and the chat stream, or is that invisible to you? I don't know how to, okay, you can see it. Good. I'm glad. I didn't know if you were, yeah, thank you. I didn't know if you were able to see that. Okay. So, and I try to faithfully go through your questions, so that's not an issue. Um, okay. So who should I react to? And then my second question is, what questions do you have of anything that happened this week? It was a big week with a lot of things happening, right? With the Lindsey Graham thing, with incursions into Belgorod, with the Moscow thing. Okay. So some things are starting to pop up. Well, thank you. Hi from the UK. Yes, yeah, that's why we sometimes end up talking to each other. Okay. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Right, sure. Okay, so what questions do you have for me? What can I answer for you? Um, Again, the reason that I do the types of videos that I do, triangulating amongst UA tubers and then doing the reaction, is because I am concerned that we otherwise might get into a self-fulfilling loop, an echo chamber, and we don't want to do that. We want to be able to expand our thinking. And again, everything I'm trying to do is provide you context. Okay, so your questions, start putting them into the chat, and I'll start trying to work my way through them. So, and by the way, while you're doing that, oh, here, questions. Well, I'll tell you that in a moment. Russian air fleet, did we hit jets? Former race car driver says yes, but I don't know. I'll tell you if I know something, and if I don't know something, I won't tell you. I mean, it's pretty easy. Ozzy says pretends to be a Ukraine, but he was exposed as being a Russian in Russian. And from Europe, do you feel that the results of the REP primary Republican primaries may have an effect on U.S. support in Ukraine? I think what to watch for So I think the primaries will push even Trump more toward Ukraine because he's going to be the only he right now he's the only one, and all the other guys over here are all pro-Ukraine, and Trump's the only one that is taking this. But he's taking this position like I can end it tomorrow, I can make a deal with whatever. It's not anti-Ukraine in itself, but its effect will be anti-Ukraine or negatively affecting Ukraine because the deal that he would make would be some kind of okay, you get this land and you get to keep the rest of that, and that's not the way to go. Um, but Trump likes to see himself as a big deal maker, and that's where he is. But he's out here by himself. DeSantis is over here, and then everybody else is right here, right? So um, the effect will be to, I think, galvanize some support, but I don't know that that's within the population, but I don't know that that's going to matter if Trump gets reelected or gets there. But Trump will have to. So in politics, you run to the far ends. With like the Democrats run here and the Republicans run here, and then they run to the middle to get elected. That's the way it works when you have a two-party system. By the way, when you have a two-party system, you have coalitions, but the coalitions are in the party before in the primary. So the action is in the primary, not in the general election, right? So the primaries are really important. If you like in England, I don't know how many or Britain, I'm sorry, I don't know how many different parties you have, but you have each of the different parties get elected and they form a coalition. Well, our coalitions, like within the Republican Party, are the those that are in it for moral social values, or those that are libertarians, or those that are free marketeers, and those that are traditional conservatives, and the populists, and they all get together. They form a coalition in one party because one big party versus the other big party, you have a greater likelihood than if you're a tiny little party that has no possible chance because you have no backing. So at any rate, I'm digressing now. But yes, I think the net effect will be to push us closer toward that. And then when you get to the general election, even if Trump is elected, let's say it's Trump over here, and he's the primary candidate, he's going to have to get pushed toward the center in order to actually get elected. And we know that. So we'll see how that all plays out. Okay, a bunch of questions got asked in the meantime. Bro, I'm not sure where we were. Pretends to be okay. Okay, U.S. politics. Vivek is against Ukraine support, but will cede Donbass to Russia. That's new to me. I did not see that. I saw him say some things that were um, far more pro-Ukraine, but not wanting to take a real nail-down position. So I'll keep my eye out for that. Um, when is the referendum in Belgorod? Well, that's a good question. Although Putin has just signed a law that allows for elections within the occupied territory because the veneer of legality means more than actual legality. Johnny Johns, okay, U.S. politics, but what is with DeSantis and Disneyland? Is terrified by some. I don't think that matters. I don't think that has anything to do with anything moving forward. It was just fighting between parties on other issues, and they got in a kerfuffle over that. Paul Young, if you make a deal with Trump, make sure you still have your fingers after. Okay, that's not really going to help us get anywhere. What actual questions do you have about whatever I can potentially answer? So the big topics this week were Senator Graham, and it seems like the Russians were more upset about Senator Graham than they were about drones in Moscow. And that's part of what played into my thinking when I was looking at the drones. Like, if this was a false flag, they would be saying stuff about it. But I was scouring RT and Pravda and other things, and I was looking at like they had like two articles. Like, why aren't they actually talking more about it? Um, so yeah, so it didn't seem to be a false flag for that reason. But like Jake Bro, I got caught up in this idea like certainly they can't get drones all the way from the Ukrainian border. Their air defense would have caught it before it got that many miles to Moscow. But maybe the Russians are just that bad with their air defense. I mean, that could very well be what's going on. Okay, questions. I don't see any questions. Nobody wants questions. If you don't mind, put the questions in, and if you could hit like so they can spread, I would appreciate it. So it wasn't just the Lindsey Graham thing. When what Lindsey Graham said was best money we ever spent, and he's exactly right. It is the best money that we've ever spent in degrading an adversary so that they can't do damage in the region. By compared to actually, sending our own military, this is crazy economical. Steve says, "Have I noticed a change in the emphasis on Russian TV?" In the emphasis on what, Steve? I'm not sure what you're talking about, but they have. So what I watch is the English translation stuff because I don't speak Russian, right? But I read and watch that. So in English translation, Russian channels are geared toward sending out. So think about it like there's first order, there's second order, and there's third order. First order is like actual Russian for Russian consumption, and you see this with what is it, Russian Media Monitor. When I show these clips of it and it's translated, that's going to Russian speakers. Then there's like RT in English that's going out, and it's going, those articles, I've copied and pasted these and popped these into Google and seen them directly copied into Islamic and Indian and African newspapers. Like, so it's geared to spread their message to these audiences. And then there's the third order, which is like people like Scott Ritter and Doug McGregor and others that are propagating stuff. Okay, Ukraine has several security services in Russia. It could be sent from within, and that would have been my leading theory before realizing, yeah, maybe they are just that bad that they don't have air defense all along the way. So that was my leading theory, but it certainly didn't seem like a false flag because of like how quiet they were. It just didn't make sense. Are you able to explain Orban policies and hindrances to NATO? Orban likes Russia and wants to keep the cozy relationship with Russia, but he likes the benefits of being in NATO. And so he is kind of the fly in the ointment in NATO and in the EU. And I don't understand why his relationship with Russia is so cozy, but it is. And I mean, I think that's all that you really need to have a sense of. Um, the deeper issue, I think they're just mentally aligned, philosophically more aligned, or more on a similar kind of page about how they value things. And Orban tends to be a little bit more authoritarian than not. So, okay. Will a fighter jet coalition of nations expand? I believe so. I don't have any proof. But it's so as we cross these red lines, it's very interesting to see. Once it gets crossed, we just keep crossing and it'll expand to what's needed. Now, that leads to a really interesting point that so there's, I was thinking about this last night. There's these raised expectations. The expectations for the counteroffensive are sky high, and so now that I get going on something, you start asking all these questions. Hold on, let me just write this down. Offensive questions, counteroffensive expectations. I'll come back to that. Okay, let me answer your questions while they're here before they get away from me, and then I'll come back to the counteroffensive explanations. Okay, so will the fighter jet just expand? You asked people's channels to critique. War in Ukraine is one. Andrew, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in a link here. And if you can, so you'll see that link on the bottom of your feed. And if you click on that, you just pop that in, and then I can curate that. So we can talk about it, but then I can start to look at, okay, who do I need to go to first? Thank you for that, by the way, if you're willing to do that and help me kind of determine who to do reaction videos to, because some of these things just need to be answered and that they're not. And so somebody pointed out in the comments like, hey, you're trolling the trolls. That's and in a way I kind of am, because I really, when I talk about Scott Ritter, I'm not just talking to you all. I'm trying to talk to people who like Scott Ritter, to give them some cognitive dissonance, to hear, whoa, wait, he said that, and wait, hold on, wait a minute, I'm a proud American. I don't want. Wait a minute, Russian propaganda says that, and wait. So that's what I'm trying to do in that as well. Andrew Perpetua told me WIU is really in Russian, pretending to be Ukrainian. He's crafty. Okay, that's interesting. Professor, take note, please. Silicon Curtain video. Steve Hassan Hassan, does reliance on cult-like personalities over reality always end in total disaster? Um, huh. Yeah, I don't think it always does, but it probably does most of the time. I'm just I haven't watched that video, but I mean this is my field, and I read a lot about cults and I read a lot about dictators and that kind of thing. Um, yeah, it's bad because like so I'd hate to be a dictator. If you were a dictator, like you can get anybody to do anything you want, but your ability is here. I mean, it stops at you. You can't. I mean, you can't do any better than what you can do. People won't feed you. Like I've learned a ton from this audience, and then I've been able to improve and find better things to focus on that you want to see and that I can unpack for you because I'm listening to you, because we have this feedback mechanism on YouTube. If I wasn't doing that, I'd probably still be doing the things that I did, that where I have some videos from the early days that still have 6 views. It's kind of painful. But I thought they were pretty good. But I can improve when I get the feedback, and authoritarians don't really relish feedback. So, okay. So I'm gonna go look at that. Steve Hassan does Reliance. Okay, he's a proto dictator. These guys take care of each other. That's right, Anna. Um, Authoritarians love each other. I mean, they are very very chummy. It's fascinating to watch, and I'm not sure I understand exactly why, but that's right. Stephen T says, what priorities and strategic objectives can be anticipated in Russia's future foreign defense policy when the conflict is over? Considering the evolving global security and regional dynamics, it depends on how it ends. If it ends weakly, not a lot. If it ends strongly, clear defeat, Russia has been soundly defeated and has wasted their time and treasure and lives and whatever else, and has to say, okay, I give up. And look, we have to make substantial changes before you're let back into the international community to play nicely and be part of the SWIFT and everything else. Then I think you can see some changes, but without that, I don't think you'll have it. Um, just critique the ones on the red. Well, the red will certainly be first on the spreadsheet. So, um, okay. Do I think I judged the words of the words of Senator Graham were misjudged? By if you're talking about by uh, Russian media monitor, what I showed you the other day, where people are dying, it's the best money we ever spent. Yes, but the effect of it was still, this is good. We're degrading Russia, and it's the best money we ever spent. So, I mean, the spirit of it didn't change, but the intensity of it did, if that helps. Kenny G says, if Russia didn't destroy the Patriot system, why is there a video of a Russian missiles blowing up other AD systems in Kyiv during the missile strikes 2 days ago? I didn't see video of them doing that 2 days ago, and they have video of all kinds of things that aren't really um, actual, and they take credit for all kinds. So part of the difficulty here is you can't actually trust what the Russian Ministry of Defense puts out, because they lie about things so regularly that you can't tell what it is that they're doing. So I haven't seen that video, so I can't comment on that particular thing. But I mean, they destroyed more HIMARS than we had in country. They destroyed Bradley vehicles before we actually provided them Bradley vehicles. So yeah. And it's really hard because I'm trying to triangulate on what is true, and when one side won't actually show me what's true, I have to really sift harder through the Western press, which is trying to be accurate. But again, I'm not the guy going out to Twitter and saying, well, so this guy on Twitter said this, or this guy on Telegram said that. I want legitimate sources. So I'll be slower to the party to provide things, but I'll hopefully be more accurate. Um, so Robert Plant says, do you think Ukraine will send a kill team to go after Prigozhin when he least expects it? Okay, so Prigozhin, I've argued that Prigozhin has been functioning as Putin's mouthpiece, whether directly or indirectly. I don't believe he's getting a text from the boss saying, hey, talk about this, but I think he knows enough of Putin to have figured out subtly, or maybe even having conversations, I don't know, to what he wants to talk about or who he wants to slap at, and then he does it for him. Now, what Putin has done is kind of play one kid off another for daddy's affection, right? So, and it could be Prigozhin off the military, or Prigozhin off the oligarchs off the military, or whatever. And Prigozhin seems to have Putin's favor with that. And when Putin arbitrarily decides that he doesn't want to do that, he won't. But I don't know that he's in any danger of falling out of a window or that kind of thing anytime soon. I just that's my read, and I could be wrong, but this is my read of Putin, and then my read of Prigozhin, and putting those together, and why he's saying the things that he's saying. He certainly wasn't saying anything pro-Ukraine. Now, this leads me to what I was just about to talk about before, and that is that the offensive expectations. One of the things, go back to those Prigozhin videos that I did like a week and a half ago. Well, why is he saying this, or is he Putin's mouthpiece? People didn't watch the second one. The second one was really important. The one about the oligarchs, like he's slapping at oligarchs who are letting their kids go off and make these videos on YouTube and shake their booty in other countries and whatever. And he's saying that there's going to be an uprising in Russia if this doesn't stop. Well, that's, I think, Putin trying to tell his oligarchs, stop it. Don't act like this, because they're coming for you, not for him. The uprising wouldn't affect him. It would affect that tier below him. At any rate, so counteroffensive expectations. So the idea there was they're trying to build up the expectations of a massive Ukrainian counterattack, so that when it's not so massive, so the Ukrainians will do this amount of uh, counterattack, regardless of what's said. And if you say it's not going to happen and they do this much, then the difference between here is staggering. But if you say, oh, they're going to take back all this ground and there's going to be this big thing, and they still do the same amount, then it looks like less perceptually. We see this in politics all the time. So I think that's the ground that's being set in the information space. And again, I could be wrong. That's just my read. Okay, Ozzy says, right, I filled the forum and with about Ukraine channel. I'll be looking forward to hearing your thoughts on him after viewing War in Ukraine. I think I've seen that channel, and it's, if that's the one I'm thinking of, they do like a military strategy every day, but it's like an evil opposite of um, what's that little 4-minute one? Something in Ukraine. It's awesome. He doesn't show his face. He just talks about everything that's done real quick, and he does like little 4-minute clips every day. But it's like you can see the tinting, if that's the one I'm thinking of. Okay, so Kenny G is back. Oh, Kenny, are you going to be after Russia? Thank Ukraine's last week? NATO spent 3 days transporting dead and wounded SBS troops from Odessa to Poland. It's on a flight tracker. Okay, they did sink a ship, and so it's like, I think 4-1 now, because they scuttled there. Go back and watch, go into my community feed and look at just like 4 or 5 comments back. I talked about how on day, I think it was 144, I did this thing about the Crimea, like what's going on in the Crimea. Russia was putting their ships out of reach in the Crimea, so they couldn't actually do a whole lot. They couldn't, get close to the land to use them to bombard the land like they otherwise would have. They had to put them out of reach of the Ukrainian missiles, because Ukraine had sunk 4 Russian ships, and they had no navy to speak of. I mean, that they even had this one ship was still news to me. So you still got to catch up. The Moskva was kind of a big deal, and it wasn't smoking on the ship. And to see that goes back full circle to the idea that it was we can't trust what they say. Moskva gets hit with a missile on the shore to the ship, and then they say, oh, somebody was carelessly smoking. Well, how do you trust people after that when they lie like that with impunity? Okay, Michael Klein says, do you think the raids near Belgorod will lead to more or less support from the Russian people for Putin's special operation? I'm inclined to agree with Vlad about all things Russian population unless I am persuaded otherwise. And he thinks that they're apolitical, and I tend to agree with him. They've been made apolitical. Constantine seems to have a fairly similar kind of take on the apoliticalness, although he was saying that the way where they hit was somewhere in his neighborhood, which tells you the kind of money that Constantine had. Uh, so I don't think there. I've talked about this before. I don't think there's going to be any popular uprising from the people in Russia. I think if you're going to have anybody overthrow or do anything to Putin, it would be either generals or oligarchs or somebody from that class. Like there's Putin, and then there's that class, and then there's the people, and then there's like people who are really poor, right? So I think it'll come from that row right beneath him, if anywhere, but it will not come from a popular uprising. They have no history, experience. Like, we don't think about this, but in the American experience, we had from 1619, when the first colonists landed in the United States, we had the echoes of the Magna Carta all the way through, right? And then we self-governed from 1619 to 1776, and we threw off what we thought was tyranny because, wait, you can't take that right from us to make our own laws for ourselves. Like, it was so steeped in the American psyche. Um, and they have nothing like that. They've had authoritarian czars for centuries, and then the Soviet Union, and then Putin, which might have been Tsar or uh, General Secretary light, but it's nothing like something that would give them the impetus to throw things off. Ozzy's here, and Ozzy was the one that gave me the line about how Ukrainians are Cossacks and Russians are peasants, and there's some real truth to that. The Ukrainians have always had that kind of spirit and that in within their culture. Matt Litt says, I've been watching this channel, waiting for a channel like yours. Great to watch. Have ever watched Military Summary, a dissection of information he puts out, especially in his early stuff? I'm not familiar with that, and so I'll have to look it up. The Putin applies triangulation to maintain control. That's exactly right. That's what he does. A lot of authoritarians do that kind of thing, even in organizations like business organizations. The president will, if your department's doing well, it doesn't matter if you're playing nice with the other departments, and that's a terrible way to run things. Hello, Allison. Allison says, why do you think that Republicans didn't back Lindsey Graham's position on the defense budget? Well, so it's not that. It's more that they're trying to look at the bigger piece about not defaulting and trying to figure out which pieces they can get majorities for. And so I think it's just got crowded out by other political priorities going on. We're looking exclusively at Ukraine. We have the luxury of doing that. They don't. And so they're focusing on other things. I think it's just that simple. I don't think that there's anything antagonistic toward Ukraine in that thinking. Makai says, just saw your live video on my list. We'll see any recognition from the White House for an armed revolt against the Putin regime. I don't think that's coming. I don't. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just don't see it. Why is Kenny G voicing Russian propaganda? Because he's wanting to give that side of the equation. You can actually learn a lot from listening to somebody like that, from the type of questions that they say. So I welcome those thoughts because I learn from it, as long as they're not rude. Once they're rude, then I ban them. Um, when okay, so let's see here. Where was I? Um, CIA contact says, when will Ukraine get helicopters for an airborne division? Don't know. I don't think it's out of reach, but don't know. Oh, by the way, going back to the counteroffensive. So I was going to say, so the expectations are here and the weapons are here. But I wonder if part of slowness in giving the weapons is to after the counteroffensive. You want to give them everything that they need to be successful. But there's an argument to be made that if the counteroffensive is here and they don't do it, well, then they need more weapons, right? But if you're giving them everything and then they only get so much success, then like you could lose the support. I don't know if there's anything to that. It's just something that was in my head. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, but okay. Matt says, I can't find any war in Ukraine channel on YouTube. It's confused with reporting from Ukraine. Reporting from Ukraine is a pretty solid channel as far as I can tell, and they do these great little 4-minute kind of updates. Do you think that Russia is going to give up the war if they get pushed out of Ukraine, or will the war along their borders? Yeah, I think it depends on how it ends. They have to be like really severely hit hard, punished, beaten on the borders, maybe incursions into Russia itself, into like take that area around their borders as the buffer should be Russia buffer, not Ukraine buffer, if you want to have a buffer. And then you'll see them have to make certain concessions. Um, he's a pro-Russian troll. Thanks. I think Constantine family briefly had money and fell out of favor and fled. Yeah, if I recall correctly, that was what happened. Will you do a video on Colonel Douglas McGregor? I already have, and his possible motivation for a Putin agenda. He has a chip on his shoulder that only matches the other chip on his shoulder, and he's kind of like Ritter and just an anti. He's anti upper echelon generals. It's weird. Ritter is like anti-U.S. government, and he's like, look, he was talking about Hirsch yesterday in that video that I showed you there. Um, but they both have this the U.S. is bad kind of thing going on. Okay, I have to go, and I'm sorry about that. I'll talk to you later. Bye.